what stops most people from going out and voting? And how do we believe we could actually encourage individuals to become more politically aware?
Sure. Well, I think in the United States, we have a couple obstacles to voting. One is the registration process, right? So you must register to vote prior to voting, either 2 weeks or sometimes 4 weeks to voting. Most other countries do not have that. You just walk up with your national ID card or your driver's license and you vote, and you're already in the system ready to vote. As well, in the United States, we have some voting suppression efforts where one or two of the political parties are trying to suppress the votes by certain people who they know will not vote for them, and that makes it hard to vote. And I think, more recently there's been a lot of disinformation and maybe foreign interference in elections that discourages people from voting.
So what exactly causes this disinformation, and what is the gap between people who are going out and voting and people who are not because they simply just don't know what's going on?
And so the disinformation comes maybe from two principal sources. One would be negative ads by an opponent. And we know statistically from studying this in political science that negative ads tend to discourage the potential supporters of the candidate who's receiving the negative information from voting.
Wow.
And so they don't sway people or get people's opinion to change, but what they do is cast some doubt on the worthiness of that candidate, and that discourages people. And over a mass of people, that leads to less support for that particular person.
Interesting.
There's also another source of disinformation campaigns that's been in the news the last 3 years, which would be foreign interference in elections, specifically Russian interference, right? Where they're trying to sow negative ads and trying to discredit our election system for larger foreign policy purposes.
And if we looked at the same type of issue, but at a more domestic micro scale, we talked about with Atlanta earlier, the whole voting issues going on in Georgia with the 2018 gubernatorial elections, the fact that a lot of votes were not accounted for, and 70% of those were African American votes. What does that have to say towards the whole voting registration and how people with positions of power in politics are able to tweak with the system and kind of bend it in their favor?
Well, unfortunately, the United States has a long history of racism in all aspects of life, and specifically when it comes to voting. The Voting Rights Act was not until the mid-'60s, right, which is when we actually guaranteed African Americans the right to vote, even though they had nominally been given the right to vote 100 years earlier. So I think what happened in Georgia, in the Georgia gubernatorial election, is indicative of a lot of other challenges that people of color have in voting in the United States. Not that it's impossible for them to vote, but they face challenges that white people do not.
Interesting. And with the whole voting process in general, obviously in the United States we use the electoral college system, and even though in the electoral college it's not a perfect resemblance of the popular vote in the nation, do you believe this is a fair way for us, the people, to choose our representatives in government?
Well, any way that society expresses a choice for its leadership or its policies is somewhat arbitrary, right? There's no perfect way of making these social decisions. The electoral college system was designed to prevent passions or kind of